record-breaking year for illegal immigration. CBP reported 2.47 million alien encounters along the southwest border in fiscal year 2023. Since taking office, Secretary Mayorkas has overseen more than 6.5 million southwest border encounters, 7.8 million nationwide encounters, and more than 1.8 million known gotaways, all records. To put this into perspective, the number of illegal immigrants who've entered our country since President Biden took office is greater than the population of 33 of our nation's states. I'll repeat that. More than 33 out of our 50 states. Furthermore, under Secretary Mayorkas, violent Mexican cartels are making record profits. In fact, the New York Times reported that cartels earned around $500 million a year in 2018 on human smuggling. Today, they earn an estimated $13 billion. The failure of this administration's border policies has created a humanitarian and national security crisis as transnational criminal organizations prey on vulnerable migrants and sneak across violent felons and individuals on the terrorist watch list. And yet, Secretary Mayorkas has continued to mislead Congress and the American people, claiming that this is what a secure border looks like. Second, malicious activity by nation-state actors and terrorism poses a direct threat to the United States homeland. Without question, the homeland is less safe under this president. The catastrophic Afghanistan withdrawal 2 years ago signaled weakness and a lack of leadership to the world. Our nation's adversaries have been emboldened to attack our allies and our friends and are undermining our security here at home. Significant threats to our cities and our local communities are only growing. As each of you recently testified before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, foreign terrorist organizations, including those supported by Tehran, have gained a sense of momentum following Hamas's brutal terrorist attack against Israel last month. These terrorist organizations continue to call for attacks against the U.S. at home and abroad. This includes al-Qaeda, which, as Director Wray has pointed out, has issued its most specific call to attack the U.S. in the last 5 years. As our adversaries seek to further destabilize the Middle East, we must confront how these threats directly impact our own homeland security. According to DHS, 294 aliens whose name appear on the terrorist watch list were stopped trying to cross our southwest border between ports of entry since FY 2021. Compare that with 11 individuals stopped in the 4 years before FY 2017 through 2020. Think about that for a moment. It's intuitive. Why would these individuals, who under the previous president only had 11 attempts to cross and were caught, suddenly feel like they could try and succeed? Policy changes. In the last 2 years, CBP encountered over 6,000 special interest aliens from Afghanistan, 1,600 from Pakistan, 659 from Iran, and 123 from Iraq between ports of entry. Additionally, DHS documents obtained by this committee show that more than 20,000 Russians, nearly 230 Afghans, and more than 1,800 Uzbeks have been released into the country via the misguided CBP One app, mass parole program with minimal or no vetting. And these are just the ones we know about. How many other individuals posing a national security threat have been among the 1.8 million known gotaways? No one knows. And that is terrifying. Our committee has been engaged with DHS, the FBI, and CTC to ensure resources are appropriately allocated to counter these threats from terrorism. That said, more must be done. We are still waiting on sufficient information on the Biden administration's handling of the heightened national security risk posed by a massive number of aliens with terrorist ties illegally crossing the southwest border. We will not be deterred. We demand DHS's full compliance and without delay. Compliance that I might add is dictated by the Constitution. Third, anti-Semitism is rising, and threats against communities of faith in the United States are reaching historic levels. Anti-Semitic attacks have risen sharply in the United States since October 7th. Foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS have called on its extremist supporters to target Jewish communities in the United States and Europe. The free world pledged never again nearly 80 years ago. Now it's time we stand firm and united against this evil. We must not let these anti-Semitic attacks and the increasingly hateful rhetoric become a harbinger of something worse to come. We must do all we can to protect houses of worship and vulnerable communities from such targeted violence. Fourth, cyber attacks continue to undermine our homeland security. The cyber threats we face from malicious nation states and cyber criminals are increasingly complex. This summer, the federal government experienced multiple incidences, including right before the Secretary of Commerce's visit to China. Our critical infrastructure is also under attack. This year's annual threat assessment of the United States intelligence community highlighted the threat that adversarial cyber actors pose to our critical infrastructure owners and operators. DHS, CISA, and the FBI have a crucial role to play in supporting these owners and operators to defend against and respond to these threats. Finally, we must address the challenge posed by the CCP. Against the backdrop of all these threats lie the specter of a regime that continues to challenge the United States economically, technologically, diplomatically, and militarily. Through its relentless espionage, the CCP is stealing U.S. intellectual property, trade secrets, and other sensitive data of Americans and American companies. Over the past year alone, the CCP has increased its espionage efforts against the homeland in a variety of ways. These include the CCP's surveillance balloon, collecting intelligence on sensitive sites, and Chinese nationals posing as tourists to access our military installations and other sensitive sites. And Chinese nationals who have crossed our southern border at unprecedented levels. 24,000 apprehensions of Chinese nationals at the southwest border in FY 2023 alone, a 1,100% increase from last year. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see there's intentionality there. If recent reports are correct, the CCP also operates dozens of overseas police stations, which aid their transnational repression effort by intimidating and threatening Chinese dissidents abroad. DHS and the FBI must ensure that transnational repression tactics and schemes by foreign governments cannot continue on American soil, and we stand ready to help. The CCP has also made strides in infiltrating our nation's education system. It should concern every American that billions of dollars from the CCP are flowing into our K-12 classrooms and institutions of higher education. This is a systematic effort by the CCP to expand its influence within America's classrooms and promote its authoritarian and anti-American agenda. So what is the Homeland Security Committee doing about these threats? Well, first, in May, we passed H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act, the most comprehensive border security legislation in decades. We have addressed cyber threats head-on through a whole-of-nation approach. We've passed legislation encouraging responsible use of open-source software in the federal government and building DHS's cyber workforce. I've convened a group of committees across Congress to discuss and develop solutions to this problem that implicate multiple committees of jurisdiction. Just last week, this committee advanced Congressman Pfluger's legislation to prohibit DHS funds from flowing into universities that host Confucius Institutes and Chinese entities of concern. Further, we passed Congressman Guest's common sense legislation to counter the CCP's brazen espionage and theft of U.S. innovation by barring DHS from purchasing drones from the PRC or other foreign adversaries. We have held multiple hearings to examine the evolving threat of terrorism more than 2 decades after September the 11th and their implications on the homeland, including a recent hearing where we received confirmation of the immediate and significant threat the Iranian regime poses to the United States homeland. This committee has also demanded information on individuals from Uzbekistan and other countries who used a smuggler with ties to ISIS to enter the United States through our southwest border. We also demanded information on DHS's screening and vetting of Afghan evacuees in the wake of our catastrophic withdrawal. Most recently, we've requested documents and information from both DHS and the FBI on terrorist threats at the southwest border. The department and FBI's delays and lack of responsiveness have become an unacceptable pattern. Make no mistake, we will continue to use every tool at our disposal to secure these answers for the American people. I look forward to a productive conversation about the current threats to our homeland and the actions being taken to prevent them. I thank our witnesses for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning and welcome to our witnesses, Secretary Mayorkas, Director Wray, and Director Abizaid. We welcome you. With one notable exception, during the prior administration, you and your predecessors have regularly come before this committee to discuss security threats facing the homeland and how your department and agencies are keeping our country safe. Thank you for being here today and for your service. And please convey our thanks to the dedicated public servants who work for you and for all of us every day. This worldwide threats hearing takes place with a war going on in the Middle East, persistent threats from foreign terrorist organizations and domestic violent extremists, and surging anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We are seeing more sophisticated cyber attacks, unprecedented global migration, and have a presidential election less than a year away. The list of issues critical to the homeland goes on. My Democratic colleagues and I plan to ask you about these issues, and we stand ready and willing, as always, to work with you to address these challenges on behalf of the American people. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues have a different agenda today, and we need to be clear about what their agenda really means from the outset of this hearing. Republicans are directly politically motivated attacks at administration witnesses, and they are doing so to distract from Republicans' own failures at governing, their infighting, and their support for a Republican presidential candidate who is himself a threat to democracy. That's what some people in Washington do rather than take responsibility for their own failures. And to be sure, Republicans have failed at running the House of Representatives. They ousted their own speaker, paralyzing the House and bringing the legislative process to a standstill for weeks as they fought among themselves. They can't manage to pass bills to fund the government. Instead, they have abruptly pulled spending bills from the House floor and have gone from near shutdown to near shutdown despite the harm it caused to our government, our economy, and our security. They appear on TV to rant about border security, and they issue bogus so-called reports replete with false statements and racist rhetoric about the border. Others complain about bookstores refusing to sell their propaganda. But when it comes to actually paying for border security personnel and resources or passing legitimate border security legislation, they are AWOL. They talk tough about strengthening our cyber defenses, but then vote to slash funding for the agency charged with that important mission. They revere their presidential candidate, who admires dictators and despots, calling them capable, competent, and smart, who recently referred to his political opponents as vermin and threatened to use the Justice Department against them, who talks about erecting, quote, detention camps, unquote, on United States soil. Republicans don't want to own up to it or deal with any of that. So rather than getting their own house in order, they direct baseless attacks at the administration and Secretary Mayorkas in particular. We know their extreme MAGA members are desperate to impeach someone, anyone at all. They're on a crusade to impeach the secretary, although there's zero justification for it. Unlike the Trump administration, the Biden administration has followed the law on border security and immigration, claiming asylum at the border is lawful. If my Republican colleagues don't like the law, well, they're in the majority. Try to change it. The prior administration also refused to provide information sought by Congress in more than 100 congressional inquiries, but this administration has been and continues to be responsive to Congress. It is my understanding today's hearing is Secretary Mayorkas' 27th time testifying before Congress since being confirmed as Secretary. Under his leadership, DHS has responded to more than 1,400 congressional letters and produced more than 11,000 pages of documents to this committee alone. Secretary Mayorkas is carrying out his responsibilities as Secretary of Homeland Security, but Republicans don't like this administration's policies. Cabinet secretaries shouldn't be impeached over policy differences. That's not what the Constitution says. That's not what the founders intended. They certainly shouldn't be impeached to distract from Republican failures or to appease the extreme MAGA element that has overtaken their party. Rather than this impeachment distraction, we should be focused on how Congress and administration can work together to secure the homeland. That's what this committee has done since its inception. That's what we were sent here to do, and that's what the American people expect of us. It's a shame my Republican colleagues are working their own agenda instead because of this committee and this Congress and our homeland suffers because of it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record, and I'm pleased to have an important panel of witnesses before us today, and I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. The Honorable Alejandro Mayorkas was sworn in as Secretary of Department of Homeland Security by President Biden on February the 2nd of 2021. Mr. Mayorkas has had a 30-year career as a law enforcement official and a lawyer in the private sector. From 2013 to 2016, he served as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and as the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from 2009 to 2013. The Honorable Christopher Wray became the 8th Director of the FBI. On August the 2nd, 2017, Mr. Wray started his law enforcement career in 1997, serving in the Department of Justice as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. The Honorable Christine Abizaid was sworn in as the Director of National Counterterrorism Center on June 29th of 2021. She is the 8th Senate-confirmed Director and the first woman to lead the United States counterterrorism enterprise. Previously, she served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Secretary Mayorkas for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, distinguished members of this committee. In September, the Department of Homeland Security published the 2024 Homeland Threat Assessment, laying out the most direct, pressing threats to our security. Already, in the weeks since the assessment was published, the world has changed. Hamas terrorists horrifically attacked thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Israel on October 7, brutally murdering, wounding, and taking hostages of all ages. In the days and weeks since, we have responded to an increase in threats against Jewish, Muslim, and Arab American communities and institutions across our country. Hate directed at Jewish students, communities, and institutions add to a pre-existing increase in the level of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. As the last month has shown, the threat environment our department is charged with confronting has evolved and expanded constantly in the 20 years since our founding after 9/11. Today, individuals radicalized to violence can terrorize using a vehicle or a firearm. A transnational criminal organization needs only to conceal 2.2 pounds of fentanyl in a commercial truck or passenger car crossing through our land port of entry to kill as many as 500,000 people. Lone actors in nation-states such as Russia, Iran, North Korea, and the People's Republic of China can use computer code to steal sensitive personal information, shut down critical infrastructure, and extort millions in ransom payments. Compromising deepfake images can exploit and ruin the life of a young person. Extreme heat, wildfires, and devastating hurricanes are increasing in frequency and severity. And our department's founding rationale, the threat posed by foreign terrorists using weapons of mass destruction, remains. The 260,000 men and women of the Department of Homeland Security work every day to mitigate these threats and many more. I am immensely proud to be here today on their behalf to discuss the work they do, the challenges they face, and most importantly, the support they require from Congress to do their jobs. Thank you for the opportunity to do so. I would like to focus today on two such means of critical, urgent support. First, Congress must now not allow key DHS authorities to lapse. Our department's authority to implement the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards expired on July 28th. That means the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is barred from inspecting over 3,000 high-risk chemical facilities, including one in Shepherd, Texas, where an explosion last week forced nearby communities to shelter in place for hours. We are also barred from identifying who is accessing them and whether they are stockpiling dangerous chemicals. Historically, more than a third of inspections identify at least one gap in a facility's security. Our counter-drone authority will expire on Saturday, challenging, among other missions, the Secret Service's ability to protect the President and Vice President, and Customs and Border Protection's ability to patrol the southwest border and intercept cartel drones ferrying drugs and other contraband through the air. Our department's Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Authority will expire on December 21. That would hinder our ability to detect biological and illicit nuclear material threats and safeguard against the use of AI in the development of biological weapons, as President Biden charged us with doing last month in his executive order on artificial intelligence. Finally, key elements of our intelligence collection authority under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act will expire on December 31. Expiration would leave our country vulnerable to attacks supported by American citizens, and it would cripple our ability to identify and secure American citizens who are the targets of such attacks. Renewing each of these four authorities is common sense, bipartisan, and critical to our national security. This is not a moment to let our guard down. Second, we need Congress to allocate sufficient resources to enable our nation's frontline officers to carry out their difficult jobs and keep the American people safe. Last month, our administration requested critical supplemental Homeland Security funding that would help us do just that. This funding package would allow us to more effectively combat the scourge of fentanyl, stem the impacts of historic migration, and accelerate work authorization for eligible non-citizens. This funding will, in short, make a critical difference in our department's operational capacity and in our national security. Ensuring the safety of the American people is a national imperative and a governmental obligation. I look forward to partnering with Congress to deliver for the men and women who keep our country safe. I look forward to working with you to address the threats and challenges America faces today and in the years to come. Thank you, and I look forward